Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato, and today we're going to be talking about the suicide rate in America and just how horrendous and tragic this is. Just on a personal side note, I grew up in steel and coal country of the United States, and it was very obvious that those areas of the country, the heartland of America, were really neglected. And in some cases, I really strongly feel outright destroyed by the American government. The American government, the oligarchs in control of the American government, seemed actively hostile towards the type of people that lived within these areas, despite the fact that these people sacrificed their bodies for the steel and coal industry to build America, to make it the manufacturing powerhouse that it was in the early 1900s and mid 1900s. And so it's tragic to see this suicide rate be so high, especially in areas of the country that really sacrifice so much and just have so little potential opportunities available to themselves. So let's go on with the article. So this is in AP News. This is titled, U.S. Suicides Hit an All-Time High Last Year. About 49,500 people took their own lives last year in the United States, the highest number ever, according to new government data posted Thursday. Okay, so there's something to think about here. It is 49,500 that actively committed suicide. That does not include people who died from drug overdose, which are called deaths of despair, which is over 100,000 people. Okay, so all these fentanyl-related deaths, opioid-related deaths, amphetamine-related deaths, those are separate. Okay. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention, which posted the numbers, has not yet calculated suicide rate for the year, but available data suggests suicides are more common in the U.S. than at any time since the dawn of World War II. Okay. I tried to tell older Americans, the baby boomer generation, this, and they just don't get it. America is doing far worse than it was doing in like the 70s, 80s. There was like an oil crisis back then. It is doing in some ways worse than World War II. And in some ways, this is the worst since World War II. But it is definitively a very bad time, the worst time in at least the last 80-ish years. Okay. The article goes on to say there's something wrong. The number should not be going up. Said Christina Wilbur, a 45-year-old Florida woman whose son shot himself to death last year. My son should not have died. I know it's complicated, I really do, but we have not been able to do something that we're not doing because whatever we're doing right now is not helping. Experts caution that suicide is complicated and that recent increases might be driven by a range of factors, including higher rates of depression and limited availability of mental health services. There's so many reasons that it's occurring. I mean, the gender breakdown, the hostility between males and females, the breakdown where people don't even agree that there are two genders. They think there are 72 genders. People are confused about their sexual orientation, their gender. They're not having relationships. They're not having friendships. They don't have economic opportunities. They're working their entire lives. They don't get to spend any free time having fun. They're not able to make ends meet and have a roof over their head and feed themselves given their jobs because they don't have a living wage. They don't have health care. They're not able to afford an education without going into debt for the rest of their lives. I mean, the thing is, if this was unintentional, some of these things would be happening. If you actively hate your own population, which the oligarchs in charge, the rootless cosmopolitans who control our financial system in the United States, if you actively hate your population, you'd be doing all of these things in order to cause their suffering and to cause their deaths. And that's exactly what we're seeing. You don't get to this level of incompetence across the board like this unless it's intentional. The most parsimonious explanation is not incompetence here. It is actual evil. It's evil. So the article goes on to say, but a main driver is the growing availability of guns, which is a ridiculous statement, said Jill Harkavy Friedman, Senior Vice President of Research at the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Suicide attempts involving guns end in death far more often than those with other means, and gun sales have boomed, placing firearms in more and more homes. A recent Johns Hopkins analysis used preliminary 2022 data to calculate the nation's overall gun suicide rate, which rose last year to an all-time high. For the first time, the gun suicide rate among black teens surpassed the rate among white teens, the researchers found. Okay, I know in later adulthood, something like the 30s and 40s, white adults commit suicide at high rates. They realize that their life's never going to get better. They're going through divorces. Their wife has cheated on them. They're losing all their money in a divorce, et cetera, et cetera. Just so many things go wrong, and people just commit suicide in those ages. I was not expecting suicide rate to be so high among black teens. It doesn't really make sense to me, considering the amount of hostility there is towards white people, the amount of anti-white propaganda going on. So I would like to learn more about why that's the case. Okay, so this article goes on to say, I don't know if you can talk about suicide without talking about firearms. Harkavy Friedman said, U.S. suicide steadily rose from the early 2000s until 2018, when the national rate hit its highest level since 1941. That year saw about 48,300 suicide deaths, or 14.2 for every 100,000 Americans. The rate fell slightly in 2019 and dropped again in 2020. During the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic, some experts tied that to a phenomenon seen in the early stages of wars and natural disasters, where people pull together to support each other. Okay. But in 2022, suicides rose 4% last year. According to new data, the number jumped by more than 1,000 to 49,449, about a 3% increase versus the year before. The provisional data comes from U.S. death certificates and is considered almost complete, but it may change slightly as death information is reviewed in the months ahead. The largest increases were seen in older adults. Deaths rose nearly 7% in people's ages 45 to 64, and more than 8% in people 65 and older. White men in particular have very high rates, the CDC said. Okay, that's exactly what I was expecting, is white people of millennial generation, Gen X generation, and even the baby boomer generation. Many middle-aged and elderly people experience problems like losing a job or losing a spouse, and it's important to reduce stigma and other obstacles to getting them assistance. Okay. Suicides in adults aged 25 to 48 or 44 grew about 1%. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in that age group in 2022, up from number 4 in 2021. That's a steep increase. Okay, let's see. We're going to skip some of this. Okay, Christina Wilbur, the person who was talking earlier in this article, lost her 21-year-old son, Kale, on June 16th last year. He died in her home in Land O'Lakes, Florida. Kale Wilbur had lost 2 friends and an uncle to suicide and had been dealing with depression. On that horrible morning, he and his mother were having an argument. She confronting him about his drug use, and his mother said she left his bedroom, and when she returned, he had a gun. I was begging him not to and to calm down. It looked like he relaxed for a second, but then he killed himself. She described her life since as a black hole of emptiness and sorrow, and had found it hard to talk to friends or even family about Kale. There's just this huge 6'2" hole everywhere. She said, everything reminds me of what's missing. It's hard to find a professional help, and those that are around can be expensive. She said she turned to support groups, including an organization called Alliance of Hope for Suicide Loss Survivors that operate a 24/7 online forum. There's nothing like being with people who get it. Wow, this is such a grim article, but this is the state of America, and I cannot emphasize what I'm about to say enough. It's not going to get better in America, okay? It's not. The oligarchs in charge of America hate the American population. They are ruthless cosmopolitans these ruthless cosmopolitans exploit populaces and extract their resources all across the world, and they have no remorse about doing the exact same thing in America and other Western countries, because for them, they understand that if it ever gets back to them and people end up becoming concerned about the oligarchs doing this to the populace, they understand they can just flee to Israel, okay? And so these Zionist oligarchs who control America and who are pushing drugs within communities and are pushing anti-white agenda that's increasing the white suicide rate and pushing all of these things that are anti the native populations of these countries, they understand they're ruthless cosmopolitans. They can just flee the country at the end. They've done this many times before, okay? This is, you should not be surprised that this is happening. They hate the populace. Look at the Sackler family that pushed opioids in rural communities in America, okay? These are Zionists. They despise the American population. I can't emphasize that enough. Anyways, it's just sad. And I do every once in a while want to bring your attention to these types of matters, because if you're not in America, you might think that these oligarchs are extracting the resources and exploiting the populaces of your country. And you're not recognizing that they're also doing this to Americans as well. This is what it looks like when the oligarchs do this to every country in the world, because they understand, aside from Israel, because they understand they can flee to Israel. So that's what I'll leave you with. Thank you for watching. If you found this to be helpful, please give us a thumbs up. It helps us in the algorithm. Please subscribe to our channels on YouTube and Rumble for more content. Please tell a friend about our show if this could help them open their eyes to what's going on. We are being suppressed in the algorithm. Please leave us a comment down below. Questions, concerns, critiques, I do read all of them and I respond when necessary. And that's all we have. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.